Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today is going to be a fun episode with my friend James Dudley of James Dudley Guided Hunts. James, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Jay. How are you?
Good. I got to set the scene here a little bit for the listeners. I've had you on the podcast several times, and we've had some great stories and great conversations. I first met James. He had shot that big velvet giant deer, a handful of years ago, and just an unbelievable story that went with that. I encourage the listeners, if they haven't heard that story, to go back and listen to that. I still get people talking about that podcast and the story, but James is a Coues deer nut and spends a lot of time all year round running trail cameras and glassing, and basically he's just fallen in love with these deer, and it's always great to talk to you. James, first question I have for you is, last year coming off such a huge drought, and conditions not being ideal, and then, kind of getting some late rains here and there, but and then we go into this year where, it just seems like everything has been perfect. All conditions seem to be ripe, and, moisture seems to be as good as it can possibly be. Just curious your overall thoughts and your predictions for this upcoming season. I know we've got a June 11th deadline for this draw, so I want to pick your brain on a bunch of stuff. But general overall thoughts on moisture this year?
Yeah, so this year is unlike anything I can remember. The grass everywhere you go in central Arizona is tall, it's green, and all the tanks are full, and then we've been getting rain and snow, it seems like every day. A section of the state has been getting a bunch of rain, and like today, May 20th, I know that up north of the rim, there's snow all over the place again. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I think antler growth is going to be great this year. Last year, we had a lot of bucks that regressed, a lot of bulls that regressed, and then I just can't wait to see what they're going to turn into this year.
So when you talk about, animals regressing, a lot of times I think that that's a situation where their body condition just, they were trying to put every bit of nutrient into their bodies, and it just didn't translate into their antlers. And you talk about elk, you talk about, deer. You run a lot of cameras. Obviously, it's way too early to tell, especially on deer right now as far as growth. But are you doing anything different in your camera sets this year as far as, with the conditions the way they are and as wet as it is, with, maybe every tank out there having water? Do you put anything out earlier? Are you running things later? Are you doing anything different or abnormal than what you normally do?
No, nothing really abnormal. I just try and get everything out early, and I just do that just because that's the way I like to. There's no reason. You don't need to have cameras out right now because there's nothing to really look at as far as antler growth, but I just like to get everything set, make sure it's working. I put salt on all my cameras, so I just want to make sure the elk and the deer know where to find the salt starting, in March or April, and just keep resalting and keep checking my cameras. Just go ahead.
It's more of a preparation. So you're just wanting, on a good year, you're wanting to make sure all your spots are firing on all cylinders, so you're making sure that there's salt at all of the areas. Question for you, are you using, block salt? Or are you carrying in granulated bags of salt? What is your recipe for getting the best results? And it may change, and please let us know if it's different for elk or deer.
So I've always just used the 50-pound trace mineral block salt. They look like a rock. It's just a big red salt block. And I'll break those in half and pack those all around and set those up on cameras. This year, I had to use some of the granule salt on a couple cameras just because I couldn't get any of the red block salt at the feed shop that I go to. So I know that it all works the same, it seems like. I have pictures of deer digging through a foot of snow trying to get down at that salt. Even though it's been gone, the salt will deteriorate. They'll still be digging through the snow trying to get to the dirt. So I think any salt works. I just like the red stuff because it's not as obvious. If somebody walks by, they're not going to see the red block as opposed to a big pile of white salt.
So in essence, you are running this just to take inventory and just to try and basically assess what's in the area. You're not doing it to hunt over or anything like that. You're basically just trying to establish year after year where these animals know where these different places are so that you can run cameras and then efficiently kind of be able to see what's there, correct?
Yeah. We don't really hunt over salt per se, or water. When we have clients where I hate to be like 100% or anything, but we're 95%, we're spot and stock everything we see, or everything that we want to kill, just because my clients come out from the Midwest and they've been sitting in tree stands their entire life, and the last thing they want to do is sit in a ground blind or a tree stand. So I kind of tell them up front, this is how we do things. If you're interested, this is how it's going to be. It's going to be a lot of hiking, a lot of glassing. So for the most part, we don't hunt over salt. But sometimes for ourselves, we do, because it is effective. If you have time and you know what's there, and if you're not in a spot and stock terrain, then sometimes you got to hunt over salt. And I actually have a good story about doing that last year about a big Coues deer. If you want to hear that.
I'm always a sucker for a big Coues deer story, so let's hear it.
All right. So 2 years ago, or let's see, it'd be a year and a half ago now, I started building this long-range rifle, and my buddy Brian Bentz and his father were helping me get it all set up and hand-loading everything for me and making sure that it was going to be a good gun because I didn't have a lot of experience building rifles. So anyways, Brian comes back one day from bear hunting, and he's got a shed off a Coues deer. And it's a good-looking shed. It's probably it's like 100-inch deer. So we were talking about it, where it was, and we were like, well, you should go back out there tomorrow, put a bunch of salt down, set a camera right where you found that, and see what happens. So he did that. Fast forward about 8 months, and he started getting this big buck on camera. Bunch of pictures. He was coming in, twice, 3 times a week with a couple other bucks hitting that salt. And
what time of year is this?
So
early, when he's in velvet?
This is early. So yeah, velvet. He starts getting him on camera like this time last year. So exactly a year ago. And we were just watching him get bigger and bigger. And I actually had trail camera pictures of this buck from 3 years ago, and he was 2 miles away from this spot, and he disappeared off my cameras, and then Brian picked him up this next year. So anyways, he's watching this deer get bigger and bigger all summer, and right before, August, the opener, we're looking at pictures of this deer, and I just told him, like, you got to do whatever it takes to kill this deer this year, because looking at the pictures, he's a 120-inch deer, at least. And so he went out there every day for the first 7 days of the season. Yes.
What's his configuration? What is he? A straight 3x3? What's his mainframe?
So he's a real wide 3x3 with big eye guards and a big palmation in between his G2 and G3. Just big, wide, heavy buck.
And was he one of these bucks, from the very first set of pictures that Brian was getting, that you guys were getting, was it like instantaneous, like, oh, this buck's going to be a bomber, or at what point was it like, oh yeah, okay, so right away you started seeing the first pictures were eye guards and beams. He wasn't even out to his G2 yet, but he was heavy, and he was going out wide, and you could just tell he was going to be a hog. And
yeah.
Did you know it was the shed buck, and at what point in time did you go, that's the shed buck?
Okay. So from the first set of pictures that we knew it was that deer, we could tell he was going to be giant just by what was growing out of his pedicle, the mass on it. He looked like he had Coke cans growing out of the top of his head, basically, until he split. And then once he split, he just went out real wide and carried that mass all the way through. And we just knew it was going to be a big buck. And it actually is not the shed. It's not, that buck did not drop that shed that he found. It was from another buck that was running around with that buck.
Okay, so the shed that he found just made him, you said you got to go out there and set cameras, set salt, and it turned out it's not even the shed buck. It's a completely different buck.
Yeah, it's a completely different buck that I had on camera a prior year from about 1.5 miles as the crow flies away from where his camera was. So that buck moved and disappeared, and I lost him, and then he picked him up on his camera.
Okay, you brought up all kinds of things in my head for questions.
Okay.
Do you think that the location of his salt moved the buck, number one? Number two, do you think you had him in a pattern much like Brian had him, meaning all summer long? Or did the buck just flat out, you had him over here all summer, tons of pictures, and now the year later he just moved and now he's got him? What caused him to move? Or did you just have random photo of him when he was traveling outside of his home corridor?
Okay, so I had him on camera all summer long. He would be there every couple days. I'd get a picture of him. He was with another buck, another good buck that stayed at that spot. But I had pictures of him until he rubbed. I had pictures of him till about December that year, and then he disappeared. So I didn't know at first if maybe he got shot in that December hunt or what happened, but turns out that he just moved because he's rutting, is my guess. He just wanted to go find some does and ended up over in Brian's spot and never came back to my spot.
So it wasn't like cattle moved in or sheep moved
Nope.
in or something moved in to push him. You just think he just thought the grass was greener on the other side. He went to check it out, and sure enough, it was.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so go back to the story where you were saying, you were telling Brian you got to kill this deer. You were watching him all summer, and then lead up into kind of the progression. Was the deer like clockwork? Like, what time of day did you get most of the photos of him coming in, and how was that similar or different from the summer before where you had him 2 miles away on a totally different salt?
So he was getting pictures of him during the daytime hours, with a couple other deer, a couple other bucks. And, so he went out there those first few days of the season and glassed them up a few times, but could not get a stalk on him just because of like wind, his location. That just didn't work out the way he wanted to. So he ended up kind of just sticking to his guns and deciding to sit that salt. He had already set a blind up on the salt probably in June of last year, just in case he wasn't going to be able to spot and stalk that deer, if he, just so he knew that he could sit that salt if he had to. And he ended up sitting it for like, I don't know, like 40 hours or something like that. And then finally that big buck came in and he shot it. You know, it ran a little bit. He called me right away, and of course I was in a whole another state, so I couldn't do anything to help him come track it or anything. But he called Trevor, our other hunting partner, and they went out and recovered the deer, and it turned out to be a giant. It was well over 120-inch velvet buck.
Unreal.
Yeah.
Okay, so he actually went out when the season started and glassed the deer up, but he wasn't in a stalkable position, so he didn't actually pursue or blow the deer out. He then chose to go and sit, and again, we should have had him on this podcast too because it would be great to get both of you guys' input. But
I know.
And you said, should we have him on? And I was just thinking, sometimes 3 it just doesn't go right. But anyway, you were right there in the middle of all of it. So what led his decision to saying, I think he's going to come back and hit the salt? Because from what I've heard, a lot of times it's a gamble because those deer are super habitual on salt all summer long, June and July, and even early August. But then as soon as it kind of that right around the time the season starts, it's like they all of a sudden get off of the salt. So talk a little bit about the strategy there.
Well, I'm speaking for him, but in his mind, he was just going to have a better chance sitting the salt, just plain and simple. The area that he was hunting just wasn't conducive to spot and stalk a big Coues deer, especially by yourself. He was trying to get it done by himself, and he just figured, hey, I know that this buck's been coming in here, a couple times a week all summer. So, and he knew that the buck was in the area because he was able to glass it up a few times. So he knew that eventually that buck's going to come in. It's just hopefully he comes in the right direction. Hopefully he doesn't wind. There's a lot that goes into it. Hopefully he comes in to where you have a shooting lane, all that stuff. And he was able to shoot him at I think it was 25 yards. So it was a good shot. And
hold it all together and make a good shot and get the buck killed. That's a whole nother thing. Okay. Right. From the area, well, I'm always curious how far, in other words, a lot of guys use salt to try and get photos of deer. And one of the questions that I'm always curious about is, how do you know when you're in that deer's core area? Are you on the peripheral of the area? Are you right in the center of the area? And in your opinion, can you judge by photos, oh, he comes in every day, so I must be in his core area, or he comes in every 3 days, or no, I could be right in the middle of his core area and he only comes in every 5 days? Talk a little bit about, I know you've spent many a day pulling your hair out trying to figure out how to get into the core area, because all you're trying to do is get as many photos of those bucks as you can, correct? You're trying to document those bucks, document their pattern and movement. So talk a little bit about that.
So most of the cameras that we put out, at least for Coues deer, we like to put them out in areas that are glassable for the reasons I just went over. with what happened with Brian. So I'll put my salt and camera close to a water tank most of the time on a trail that is glassable, or if I've glassed up deer in this spot before, I'll go down there and find their trail, put a camera and salt on their trail, and they'll find the salt. They always do. They'll find it quick too. So once you, I don't know, if you glass up a big buck, you can always sneak in there, set your salt out, put your camera up, and the chances are he's going to be on your camera pretty quick. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so, yeah, so what you're saying is, rather than just blindly, which I'm sure you do, some just blind throw out salt and see what you get, but you're telling me that you take glassing from the year before or whatever, and I always see deer right here, or I always see a buck right here. You specifically then go, okay, I'm going to go where I've seen that buck, and I'm going to go target that buck by putting the salt right where you've seen him. But also, to take it a step further, you're also putting that salt where you can sit and see that salt. Is that what I hear you saying? So you want to be able to sit where you can basically see that deer come and go, or you try to?
Yeah, for me, that's key. My hunting partners are probably going to kill me for giving out all of our secrets, I should say. But so no, that's just
listens to my podcast anyway.
I know.
So I wouldn't worry about it.
I'm not worried about it.
Me and you and maybe 2 or 3 of our other friends. There's, it has a very small reach, so I wouldn't worry about it.
Right. So that's all part of the way we hunt. We like to spot and stalk. Like, that's just what we like to do. I don't like to sit in the blind. None of my hunting partners, guiding partners like to sit in the blind. I don't like putting people in blinds. And like I said, I'm not opposed to it. That's how you kill big stuff. I get it. I just don't like doing it. So if I can put a piece of salt out and a camera, I know where all my glassing spots are from that salt. And I will specifically look to my glassing spot, whether it's 3 miles away with my Coues, or 500 yards away from just a nice glassing spot. I want to put it to where I can see it. So then I can find out when the deer's coming in, for the most part, what deer are hitting that salt, but then I don't have to go sit the salt. I can glass that entire square mile of where these deer are at, and I'll find the deer, and then we can go from there.
Okay, that's all good stuff. Let me ask you a question. You're talking about in the velvet. I want to know how that transitions from the salt staying in the same spot. Now you're moving into a rifle hunt. How much of the time do those same bucks continue over the next 2 or 3 months, from archery season into the rifle season and through the rifle season? How much do those bucks continue to hit the salt? That's number 1 question. Number 2 question is, what the heck is number 2 question? Number 2 question is, how does one that wants to use this method go from doing the velvet strategy and use it for the rifle strategy?
So they definitely, after they rub their antlers, they definitely hit the salt less. It seems like they get a little uninterested with it. They'll still, if it's in between their bedding and feeding area and water, they'll still walk by it, come smell it, lick it once, and then keep walking to water. But they're not interested. They're more interested in smelling it than really licking on it. And a lot of the bigger bucks that I've seen over the years, that's when they start to go more nocturnal too. So they kind of slow down their movement altogether, but especially during the day. Like when a velvet buck is growing his antlers, in central Arizona especially, from what I've seen, is they'll feed every morning for longer than people would think. They'll be on their feet eating some days until like 9 o'clock in the morning, even if it's hot outside. They're not bothered by the heat all that much. So in the afternoon, same thing. They'll come out kind of early and feed, but then after they rub, they'll stop hitting that salt as much, and it seems like they start doing a lot more of their feeding at night, right before those rifle seasons come around.
Okay. And how do you, to the second part of the question of how do you kind of use the data that you're getting? Obviously, you're telling me that they don't come in as much, but how do you still use the data from the salt and know that that buck is there to help you on your rifle hunt? Or have I already answered my own question in the fact that all that you have to do is find a buck to hunt and know that you have a home range and kind of have an idea of where that buck lives, and then it just becomes a matter of glassing that buck up, staying diligent, and finding that deer?
Yes. So that's just part of how we set everything up, is we like to glass. So we just make sure that that's always part of our strategy, that if, say we find a big giant 120, 130-inch deer and we put cameras up, we can't get them on camera. This has happened before. Put cameras right where we've seen them. And can't get him on camera. I don't know why. It's not like you see a buck, you put the cameras there, you don't get him on cameras, but you continually glass him and you know that he's right there, but he's not hitting your camera. That's what you're saying? That has happened. So that's why I put my cameras where I can see them most of the time. And like I said, I'm just talking about Coues deer specifically. This is something we like to do. Elk and mule deer are completely different, but it's just one more way to know where he's living. If you can glass that area that you have your camera set up on.
Okay, James, I want to take a quick second here to thank the sponsors of the podcast before we go any further. I want to thank GoHunt.com, my friend Cody Nelson of 20-plus years. I've been calling him the glassing guru for a long time. He is the optics authority. He's the optics manager at GoHunt.com. If you guys are looking for any binocular, tripod, spotting scopes, rifle scopes, anything to do with glassing, anything to do with optics, and you want a good deal, give Cody a call at 702-847-8747. He's at extension 2, or you can email him at optics@gohunt.com. I also want to tell you about the Go Hunt Insider and tell you to go to gohunt.com/JScott, and you're going to get access, if you become an insider member, to the best Western hunting resource tool out there. You're going to get all of the most accurate draw odds, harvest statistics. If you're applying in all these Western states, there is not a better resource than GoHunt.com Insider. You're going to get a $50 Go Hunt Gear Shop gift card just for signing up, just for going to gohunt.com/JScott and typing in JScott, and you're going to get that $50 Go Hunt Gear Shop gift card. I want to thank Go Hunt for their sponsorship of this podcast. I also want to thank Coues. That's K-U-I-U, Coues Ultralight Hunting. That's the gear that I wear on all my hunts. If you're looking on my Instagram page, I do a lot of question and answer with Brendan Burns, the CEO of Coues. I've got a good relationship with Coues, and if you guys want to learn more about Coues, go to Coues.com. That's Kuiu.com. CanyonCoolers.com, based right out of Flagstaff, Arizona. If you use the JScott19 promo code, you're going to get a 10% discount. They make great coolers. I also want to thank phonescope.com. That's the digiscoping device I use on my phone. If you go, again, on my Instagram page, all of the photos and videos there, the digiscoping photos are with Phonescope. Use the JScott19 promo code. You're going to get a 10% discount. And I also want to thank onxmaps.com. Use the JScott19 promo code. You're going to get a 20% discount there. So use JScott19. Go to onxmaps.com. It's an incredible resource. It shows public versus private land. It shows the aerial overlay. It shows the topo overlay. It has a hybrid overlay. You can plot out all your glassing points. You can plot out all the roads, the water holes, the salt lick spots. OnX Maps is an incredible tool. James, so I don't want to give away all your secrets because your hunting buddies are probably going to shoot you the next time they see you. But
yeah,
do you feel like if more people spent the amount of time that you and your buddies spend, that they would become more successful? I get a lot of messages from people wanting to know how they can become more successful. What I read between a lot of the lines, and it's, hey, I want to be able to shoot a big buck, but I don't want to put any time in. What you're talking about is you and your buddies spending a lot of time putting out salt, putting out cameras, glassing, reassessing, are these good areas? Let's move the camera over here. Okay, I found a big buck. Let's, move salt in the camera over there. Like, it takes time, does it not?
Yeah. If you want to be good at anything in life, most of us, the only way you're going to get there is hard work. You got to outwork everybody else. And by no means am I one of the best guides in the world or anything like that, but I know in order for me to be successful, I have to try and outwork everybody. And that goes along with anything I do. That's the way I was raised. You just have to outwork everyone else. So a lot of people say stuff like that, like they want to be guides or they want to do this or do that, but you got to put the time and effort into it. It's a lot of work to be successful. And saying like you got to put the time in. So last year, that same archery deer season, so we're talking August 24th, we specifically didn't have any early archery clients last year because that's kind of our time that we get to hunt. We like to hunt those velvet Coues deer, so we had, we were running all these cameras. Trevor had a buck picked out. Brandon had a buck picked out. Brian had a buck picked out. I also did. And Brandon ended up shooting a 103-inch deer on opening day. Trevor ended up shooting a 109-inch deer a couple days later. Then Brian shot that 120-inch plus deer. And I, of course, was gone for that whole season doing another job, but
working.
That's besides the point. But anyways, they earned that. Like Trevor goes out and kills big Coues deer every year because he spends the off season, studying them and glassing. He's out glassing all day. He'll go check cameras, set cameras. All those guys, it's nonstop. If they have any time at all, they're doing what it takes, whether it's packing salt in, checking cameras, like whatever they got to do. That's how it gets done. I know that you have a bunch of Coues deer guys that come on here, and I know that like Eric Forrest, same thing. That guy is he kills big Coues deer every year too. Same thing. It's because he's out there all the time. So, yeah, you get most of the time, you get out what you put in.
I think that's you hit the nail on the head. I think that's anything with life, and I think it's easy for people to see pictures and be like, golly, Trevor kills a big buck every single year. I'm sick of that guy. Well, yeah, if you follow him around all year, you'd be sick of him too because that's all he does. Yeah. And you talk about Eric, you talk about all your hunting buddies, it's like there's a common theme here, and most most people that are successful hunting, that have a niche and have something that they really enjoy, I mean, they love doing it, so it's easy for them to go out and do it. I don't want to say it's easy because it's never easy. It's easy for them to make time and justify doing what they do because they love it. It's never easy. Right. I want to shift gears here just a little bit. We've got the Arizona deer regulations and sheep regulations. The deadline's June 11th. Guys listening to this podcast trying to figure out if they're going to do the October hunt. Most units, some of the central Arizona units are a little different, but, the southern Arizona units are basically set up in a 4-hunt structure, not including the archery hunts, but just, you've got your late October, kind of your, beginning of November type hunt. You've got your late November, and then you've got your late December hunt. Just wanted to kind of give you the floor to basically talk about, in your opinion, out of those 4 hunt structures, in your opinion, year after year, which one do you think you could, if you devoted the time, could consistently shoot the best buck?
Okay, so this year, the best rifle hunt is going to be that first one, in my opinion, just because of that moon phase. The moon's going to be good this year, so it's like that last week of October. There's no moon, and that plays a big part into Coues deer hunting that time of year. At least it does pretty consistently for us. So I would choose that hunt, but last year it was the exact opposite. There was a full moon during that first October hunt, and then there was no moon in that November 13th hunt. And so I chose to have some of my clients put in for the second hunt just because it was easier to draw and there was going to be no moon, and we ended up being really successful on that hunt, and I think that moon had a lot to do with it. So this year, like I said, that first hunt, no moon. The only bad thing is it might be a little bit warmer, but I think that this year that's going to be a great hunt. You get first crack at all the bucks that made it through the archery season, so the moon's
you
perfect.
Basically have the new moon's on the 28th, and the season starts on the 25th. So the entire hunt will be dark.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about, for those that are listening that maybe don't know, why is hunting on a dark moon in non-rut times so important?
So the deer will, if there's a full moon that time of year especially, those deer are just going to be up on their feet all night feeding. Then they're going to sleep during the day because it is going to be warm at the end of October, and it's cooler at night. It's bright outside. They feel way safer at night, just like every other animal. So if there's a full moon, they're going to be feeding all night, go to bed as soon as that sun comes up, and sleep for a few hours. Then you got to try to catch them midday when they're moving beds, which is definitely possible, but it doesn't seem like many people glass for Coues deer during the middle of the day, which is another key to finding and killing Coues deer, in my opinion.
Okay, let me take that a step further. You talk about glassing during the middle of the day if guys aren't doing it, it's a huge mistake. Let me ask you a question. Are you looking in a specific area or location or spot on the mountain during the middle of the day? If so, what is it? Where is it? What are you looking for?
So, common sense and words of wisdom by everybody that's always hunted will tell you north side, north-facing slopes because it's in the shade, and that's correct. But the reason they're on those north-facing slopes is because they're in the shade. They like the shade. It's cooler. So not all deer are going to be on north-facing slopes. They could still be on west-facing slopes, south, east, whatever, but they're going to be in the shade. So definitely spend the majority of your time glassing those north-facing slopes, but don't overlook every other slope and just look in the shade. Don't waste your time looking at open spaces. Look underneath every bush in the shade, and you'll find bedded down deer.
Okay. With that being said, how much of your time is, well, you talk about glassing during the middle of the day, and you talk about deer will be behind shade. If you're looking at a hillside that has, say, a thick pocket of trees, do you kind of predict that, okay, the shade's going to change, those deer are going to move, and is that why you're picking up deer in the middle of the day? Because you're catching those 3 to 5 minute periods when they stand for a little bit, stretch for a little bit, and move and change, where now the sun, they were in the shade, they laid for a couple hours, then the sun hit them, so they got up to move around, and they may do that 3 or 4 times throughout the day. Do you focus on that?
Yeah, and most of the time when they do get up to switch beds, find some new shade, a lot of times they'll go eat for a couple minutes here and there. In between beds, they'll stop and feed for a couple minutes and then go find some more shade. I'm trying to think, but very rarely can I think of them just getting up for less than a minute, walking straight to another bed and laying down. They kind of, like what you said, stretch their legs, grab a bite to eat, and then, move around for a couple minutes, then find a bed. So if they know what they're doing, they know what bed they're going to go to a lot of times, but they still need to do that throughout the day. So they will get up, unless they're in a big, huge pocket of pine trees that you can't see into, then maybe they're going to get up and you're not going to see them. But if you're in the desert or juniper country, chances are you're going to catch them moving.
You guys shot a really nice buck on the rifle hunt with one of your clients. I think it was like 105 to 110 inch type deer, really beautiful deer. Talk a little bit about that story, then I want to ask you some elk questions, and then we'll conclude.
Okay. So that was a hunt that I'd been setting up for a couple years with some Midwest hunters. A guy was referred and contacted me, said, hey, I want to come out and hunt Coues deer. I'm associated with Can-Am. I want to bring a bunch of toys out. We're going to test drive these new toys, and write an article for Peterson's off-road magazine and shoot some Coues deer. So obviously, like, all right, well, you got to get drawn first. So he had 0 bonus points. The writer lady also had 0 bonus points. So I needed to pick a hunt down south that I knew they were going to be able to draw, first of all, and one that I already knew the area, so I'm familiar with a few units down there. So we picked the second hunt last year because of the moon and because of the 100% draw odds. And on previous podcasts, I've also said that people need to take advantage of those leftover deer tags. Basically, these were leftover deer tags that they drew because they had a 100% chance of drawing them. Anyways, we went down there, had a great time hunting. This story also has a shed involved. One of my guides.
Why does it always come back to a shed with you? There's always a shed involved with you.
I know. And I'm not even
back to a shed.
I know, and I'm not even like a shed hunter. I never post pictures of sheds. I find a lot of sheds just tromping through the forest or in the desert, but I don't know. It just who knows. Anyways, so one of my guides, Brandon, glassed up like 7 bucks in this valley that we'd killed some deer in before, and there was one big buck in there. And so we were watching them early in the morning, seeing what they were going to do, seeing where they were going to go, if they were going to bed down, if they were going to keep feeding. And they went over a rise, and like 3 little bucks came out to the left, 3 little bucks came out to the right, and the big buck disappeared. So we watched and watched and watched and never saw him. So one of the hunters for the actual rider, her name's Callie, she wanted to shoot this other buck that was in the group. So her and I took off after that deer, went out, tried to find it. It gave us a slip. We ended up sitting out there for a few hours, couldn't relocate him, started hiking back to our starting point, and we wanted to go check and make sure that that big buck wasn't down in the draw that he disappeared into. So we're walking back real slow, making sure we're not making any noise. We're in some thick brush, and all of a sudden, 30 yards away, jumps up that big giant deer that we lost earlier. He was bedded under a bush, and he just took off running. And of course, we're surprised, but I don't know, I guess we could say we should have known better, but we had been glassing that for 3 hours by that point and not been able to pick him up. But that big buck just tucked. All those other deer spread out, and that big buck just tucked into a bush and held there until we walked to 30 yards of that deer, and he exploded out, took off, disappeared. And I've had big bucks do that before. A lot of times they'll just hold. Unless you walk right up to them, they'll hold, and they know you're there, but they don't want to run. They know you're going to walk right by them. So
I want to interject something here.
Okay.
I hear James's story. I hear him talk about the deer and then the big buck and then the other deer. I would reiterate that my experience has always been when you see a big deer and he disappears in your mind, what you think he disappears, the reality is he didn't disappear at all. He just laid down, and you're not, like, 9 times out of 10, if you walk to 30 yards of the last place you saw that big buck, you will jump him up. That is my opinion. I've seen it happen. I've done it so many times where I've thought, he's gone. I'll just walk down there. And you walk down there, and he jumps up, and you're like, why am I surprised? I know this. I have to learn this. Seems like every year I have to learn the same thing. So if anybody out there is listening, if you shoot at a big buck, if you jump a big buck, if you see a lion move a big buck, the reality is a lot of times when you can't glass them up, you had them and all of a sudden they're gone. They're not gone. They just laid down. So just please next fall when you're Coues deer hunting and you're like, I lost that buck, go, I think I remember Jay and James talking about it. I can just tell you 9 times out of 10, that deer is right there. Like he did not go anywhere. So hopefully that'll help someone kill a buck next year. Go ahead, James.
Yep, that's exactly right. That happened to me multiple times last year, you're exactly right. Anyways, so the big buck jumps up, runs away. We're sure I know which direction he went, watched him go. We couldn't get a shot. He was gone. So I walked like another 40 yards further, and on the ground is that buck's shed from 2 years prior. So
awesome.
Pick up that shed, show it to Callie, and be like, this is where this buck lives, and he's as big as we think he is because I have that shed in my hand, looking at it, that it's at least a 100-inch deer shed from 2 years ago. So we get out of there. The next day, she ends up going and killing a good buck, and then we still have one more hunter, Andrew, the Can-Am guy, and we end up going back trying to find that big buck. And long story short, he ends up shooting that deer maybe at most 150 yards from where I found that shed. So that buck shed that antler 2 years ago. We glass him up right there. We jump him out 30 yards away from that shed, and then 2 days later, kill him, 100 yards away from that shed.
So another moral of the story is, and I'm stealing your thunder a little bit, I'm sure, but those big bucks, when you bump them, they will come back. Do not leave the area. Give them a little bit of time. Stay out of their core. Stay around the peripheral. Spread out. Triangulate. And that buck, 9 times out of 10, those bucks are going to come right back into the core area, right where you spooked them. You got to be patient, and you got to hold off the trigger on other bucks, and you've got to say, I know this buck lives here. We found the shed here. And sure enough, James says, yep, he came back, and they killed the deer right there. I've seen it happen so many times. I can't even, it's just mind-blowing how many times I've seen it. So, those big deer are super habitual. You've got to be patient, and you've got to stick to your plan and your strategy of, I know this buck lives right here. This is the hillside that he lives on. Let's spread out and triangulate and take our time until we find him.
Yep, that's exactly what we do and what we did and how it works every time.
That's awesome. Well, that's a beautiful buck. James, I want to conclude here. We could talk about Coues all day long, but I want to conclude here about elk. You also like elk, maybe not as much as Coues, but you also like elk. What do you have planned for this season, and what is your outlook?
All right, so this year I think is going to be just unbelievable antler growth year, just by the amount of precipitation and grass that's already on the ground. I don't see how it couldn't be after what we had last year, and I know a bunch of bucks and a bunch of bulls made it through last year, and I think it's just going to be a really good season. Yeah, we're busy. We're going to be in, archery, be up in 7 East. We'll be in 6A for the early archery. And then in the late rifle tag, we'll be back in 7 East again. And, yeah, I think that's about it. So we spread out a little bit. Season? Yeah, I love hunting elk. I love especially early elk, but we seem to get it done on those late seasons as well. Last year was kind of a tough year for everybody. There was bad antler growth for one, and then for two, the second day of the season last year, everyone got snowed in for the most part. There was a big storm across the state and a lot of snow, but we ended up shooting, I think, 6 bulls in those first 4 days. And we had a bunch of first-time elk hunters with us. We didn't kill anything big, that's for sure, but we knew we weren't even trying to. So we killed some good bulls, though, and had a bunch of fun. So this year, yeah, we'll be back up in there, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think there's going to be some big bulls in every unit this year.
That's awesome, buddy. I'm looking forward to it. I know all of us Southwest United States hunters looking forward to mule deer and elk and Coues deer and all the stuff that grows really big on big moisture years. So it's going to be exciting. It's always great having you on the podcast. I want to encourage people to check out James Dudley, guidedhunts.com. Also, James, what's your Instagram handle?
It's James_Dudley12.
Okay. The 1-2 punch?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. It's always great having you on the podcast. Always fun strategizing and hearing about all the different tactics and things that you guys use to put big animals on the ground, and it's always fun following along there on your Instagram. So you guys keep up the good work. Tell all the guys hello, and congratulate Brian on his awesome giant buck. Dar really enjoyed getting to hunt with him in Mexico. Brian actually was one of the hunt winners and won the hunt to come down to Mexico and shot a beautiful buck down there. And it's a great guy. So you guys knock them dead this year. I'll talk to you after the season, and I look forward to seeing what you guys kick out this year.
Hey, Jay, one more thing. So my name is on the company, obviously, James Dudley Guided Hunts, but without people like we already talked about this whole time, my guys, Trevor, Brandon, Brian, and Josh, I can't do any of this stuff. I'm the one on the podcast, but those are the guys that put in all the hard work and get everything done. And without them, I can't do any of it. So I just want that to be clear. I don't want to take, steal their thunder. They're the ones getting it done, not me.
Sounds good. Well, I appreciate you bringing that up, and that speaks for the guy that you are, and I look forward to having those guys on the podcast here one of these days. It'd be fun one of these days when I get back to Arizona, too, just getting around, maybe have 5 or 6 of us around a round table and just chat it up, and I keep looking forward to doing that with you guys, so we'll have to do that and get some of their stories as well. So, buddy, we'll just keep hoping that it keeps raining, keep hoping that we just have a killer monsoon and just have an unbelievable year. So excitement level, I know, for all of us Arizona hunters, it's about as good as it can get, and rightfully so, and it's going to be a fun year. So, all right, buddy, God bless you. Thanks for coming on.
All right, thanks a lot, Jay. I'll talk to you later.